Chapter 1. The Snap. The first day of January dawned bright and cold, sunlight spilling across Carley Meadows' living room like a promise she wasn't sure she believed in. The scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee lingered in the air, mingling with laughter and the faint hum of a playlist that had been looping since brunch began. Carley sat cross-legged on the couch, her favorite oversized sweater draped over her like armor, while her three closest friends, Lila, Jenna, and Marcy occupied the other cushions and chairs, wine glasses in hand despite the early hour. Honestly, Jenna said, swirling her glass with theatrical flair, New Year's Eve is just a parade of disasters waiting to happen. I swear, every guy I met last night was either married, lying about being married, or emotionally unavailable. Marcy snorted. Emotionally unavailable? Try emotionally extinct. I had one guy tell me he doesn't do feelings. Like, what does that even mean? You're not a toaster. Lila laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. Men are the worst. It's like they're all reading from the same manual. How to ruin a woman's life in 10 easy steps. Carley smiled faintly, though the words didn't sting the way they used to. They were familiar, like wallpaper she'd stopped noticing years ago. She leaned back, tucking a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, and let the conversation wash over her. This was their ritual, Saturday afternoons spent dissecting the dating market like surgeons performing autopsies. It was safe, predictable, and oddly comforting, until a soft creak of floorboards reminded her they weren't alone. James. Her son's door opened down the hall, and Carley glimpsed him out of the corner of her eye. Tall now, impossibly tall, his frame filling the narrow hallway like he'd outgrown the house overnight. He moved with quiet purpose toward the kitchen, his dark hair falling into his eyes. 14 going on 40, she thought, and her heart squeezed with something she couldn't name. James! Marcy's voice rang out, bright and teasing. Come join us. We haven't seen you in forever. James paused mid-step, his hand resting on the doorframe as if bracing himself. He turned slightly, offering a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thanks, but I've got schoolwork to catch up on. Carley frowned. On New Year's Day? He shrugged, already moving toward the fridge. Deadlines don't care about holidays. The women chuckled, impressed by his discipline. But Carley felt a pang of worry. He'd been quiet lately, quieter than usual, and she chalked it up to teenage moods, the ebb and flow of adolescence. Still, something about the way he kept his gaze fixed on the floor made her stomach twist. He grabbed a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap with deliberate calm, and started back toward his room. Carley watched him go, an impulse rising like a tide she couldn't stop. James, she called, her voice gentle but firm. Come sit with us for a little while. Be social. He stopped. Slowly, he turned, and for a heartbeat the room felt too small, too bright. His eyes, those deep, stormy eyes, locked on hers, and Carley's breath caught. There was no boy in that gaze. No trace of the child who used to curl against her side during thunderstorms. What she saw instead was a young man standing on the edge of something sharp and unforgiving. Why? His voice was quiet, almost curious, but there was an undertone that made the hairs on her arms rise. Carley blinked. Because it's nice to take a break. Talk to people. James snorted, a sound so bitter it startled her. He shook his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Talk to people, he repeated, his tone flat. You mean sit there and listen to all of you remind me how terrible I am? The words landed like stones in a still pond, sending ripples through the silence. Lila's mouth fell open. Jenna froze mid-sip. Marcy stared at James as if he'd spoken in another language. Carley felt the world tilt. James, she began, her voice trembling. What are you talking about? He didn't answer. He turned, heading for the hallway with long, deliberate strides. Panic flared in Carley's chest, sharp and sudden. She rose, crossing the room in 3 quick steps, and reached out, her fingers curling around his arm before she could think. Wait, she whispered. Please. He stopped. Slowly, he pivoted, and Carley's breath hitched. He wasn't looking up at her anymore. They were eye level, his shoulders broad beneath the worn hoodie, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. For the first time since the day he was born, Carley didn't see her little boy. She saw a man on the verge of adulthood, and it terrified her. Take your hand off me, mother. The words were soft, almost tender, but beneath them lay something dangerous, a calm so absolute it felt like the edge of a blade. Carley froze. It wasn't the volume that held her still. It was the emptiness in his eyes, a hollow ache that seemed to swallow the light. Slowly, she let go, her fingers falling away like leaves in winter. James nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and turned. He walked down the hall with measured grace, closed his door with a gentleness that felt like cruelty, and left behind a silence so heavy it pressed against Carley's ribs. No slam, no shout, just the quiet click of a door shutting her out. For a long moment no one moved. The laughter that had filled the room minutes ago was gone, replaced by something brittle and raw. Carley stood rooted to the spot, her pulse thundering in her ears, her mind replaying the look in his eyes, the way he'd stared straight through her, as if she were a stranger. Carley, Lila's voice was tentative, like stepping onto thin ice. What was that? Carley swallowed hard, her throat dry as dust. I don't know, but she did. Deep down, in the place where truth hides from pride, she knew. She'd seen the cracks forming for years, ignored the warning signs, told herself he was fine because it was easier than admitting she'd failed him. And now, standing in the wreckage of her own blind spots, Carley felt something cold settle in her bones. Her friends exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado crumbling like stale bread. Jenna opened her mouth, closed it again. Marcy shifted in her seat, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on her wine glass. Carley sank onto the couch, her legs trembling, and stared at the hallway where her son had disappeared. The playlist hummed on, oblivious, a cheerful tune that felt obscene in the silence. She thought of his words, "Remind me how terrible I am," and the weight of them crushed her chest. Had he really believed that? Had years of casual jokes and bitter anecdotes carved that belief into his heart? She'd been so busy surviving her own heartbreak, so consumed by proving she didn't need a man, that she hadn't noticed the collateral damage. Her son, her sweet, quiet James. Carley pressed her hands to her face, the sting of tears sharp and sudden. She wanted to run to his room, to knock until he opened the door, to tell him he was wrong, that she loved him more than life itself. But something in his voice, calm, distant, final, held her back. For the first time in years, Carley Meadows was afraid. Not of being alone, not of dating disasters or broken promises. She was afraid of losing the one person who mattered most, and she had no idea how to stop it. Chapter 2. The fallout. The silence after James closed his door was deafening. Carley sat frozen on the couch, her hands limp in her lap, while the cheerful playlist chirped on like a cruel joke. Lila reached for the remote and switched it off, leaving only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of Carley's heart. "Carley," Jenna began softly, her voice stripped of its usual sass. "What just happened?" Carley shook her head, staring at the hallway as if it might give her answers. "I don't know," she whispered, though the truth clawed at her ribs. She knew. She'd seen it in his eyes. The hollow, aching look of someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. Marcy leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "He's a teenager. Hormones, mood swings. Maybe he's just having a bad day." Carley wanted to believe that. God, she wanted to. But the memory of his words, "Remind me how terrible I am," echoed like a siren in her head. That wasn't a bad day. That was years of something festering beneath the surface, something she'd been too blind to see. "I think," Carley swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I think I've been saying things about men, and he's been listening." Lila's eyes widened. "You mean, all the stuff we joke about?" Carley nodded, shame burning her cheeks. "Not just jokes. Complaints. Rants. Every Saturday for years, we've sat here tearing men apart like it's a sport. And James, he's a boy. He's going to be a man." The weight of that truth settled over the room like a heavy quilt. Jenna set her glass down with a soft clink. "Carley, you didn't mean it about him." "I know," Carley said, her voice cracking. "But what if he thinks I did?" No one had an answer. The laughter that had once filled the space felt like a distant memory, replaced by the sharp sting of reality. Carley pressed her palms to her eyes, willing back the tears. She couldn't cry, not now. Not when her son was behind that door, shutting her out. The friends left soon after, their hugs awkward, their reassurances hollow. Carley barely noticed. She stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window at the frost-tipped yard, her mind a storm of guilt and questions. How long had James felt this way? How many times had he overheard her bitterness and carved it into his heart like scripture? She thought of the divorce, the day her world cracked open and spilled everything she believed about love onto the floor. She'd been so angry, so hurt, so determined to protect herself from another betrayal that she'd built walls out of sarcasm and cynicism. And James, sweet James, had been standing inside those walls, watching them rise higher and higher until he couldn't see the sky. Carley gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She needed help. She needed someone who could cut through the fog of her guilt and tell her what to do. And there was only one person she trusted for that kind of truth. Her father. She dialed his number with trembling fingers, pacing the kitchen as the phone rang. He answered on the third ring, his voice warm and steady, like an anchor in a storm. "Carley? Happy New Year, kiddo." "Dad." Her voice broke, and she hated herself for it. "I think I messed up." There was a pause, the kind that meant he was listening with his whole heart. "Talk to me." Carley spilled everything. The brunch, the laughter, James' words, the look in his eyes that had gutted her. When she finished, silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, her father spoke, his tone calm but firm. "Truth one, your son is a man." Carley blinked. "He's 14. He's a man in the making," her father said. "And men don't just wake up one day knowing who they are. They learn it, from their fathers, from their mothers, from the world around them. And right now, the world he's learning from is telling him he's broken before he's even begun." Carley sank into a chair, her chest tight. I didn't mean I know you didn't, he said gently. But truth too, he's been listening. Every word, every joke, every complaint. You think he doesn't hear? But kids hear everything. Carley closed her eyes, tears slipping free. And truth 3. Her father's voice softened, but the weight of his words hit like a hammer. He believes you. Carley pressed a hand to her mouth, a sob clawing its way up her throat. Oh God. Carley. His tone sharpened, pulling her back from the edge. You can fix this, but it's not about saying sorry and moving on. It's about showing him, every day, that he matters, that being a man doesn't make him the enemy. Carley nodded, though he couldn't see her. I will. I swear I will. Start by listening, her father said. Really listening, and stop tearing down what you want him to build. After she hung up, Carley sat in silence, her phone heavy in her hand. The house felt different now. Emptier, colder, as if James' absence had hollowed out the walls. She wanted to march down the hall, knock on his door, and pour her heart out. But something told her words weren't enough. Not yet. She rose, moving through the living room like a ghost, collecting empty glasses and plates. The laughter of her friends lingered in the cushions, mocking her. She thought of all the Saturdays spent here, sipping wine and sharpening her bitterness like a blade. She thought of James in his room, hearing every strike. Carley carried the dishes to the sink, her resolve hardening like ice. This wasn't just about fixing a moment. It was about dismantling years of damage, brick by brick, until her son could breathe again. And she would do it, whatever it took. Down the hall, James lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His water bottle sat untouched on the nightstand, condensation pooling beneath it. He could still hear their voices, his mother's laughter, her friends' jokes, the casual cruelty that had become background noise in his life. He tried to ignore it, tried to tell himself she didn't mean it. But today, something inside him had snapped, and now the pieces lay scattered across the floor of his chest. He hated how much it hurt, hated that he cared, hated that a part of him still wanted her to come through that door and tell him he was wrong, that she loved him, that she didn't see him as some inevitable disappointment. But he didn't trust her. Not anymore. James closed his eyes, pulling the walls tighter around his heart. If she wanted to prove him wrong, she'd have to fight for it. And he wasn't sure she would. Chapter 3. The plan. Carley woke the next morning with a headache that had nothing to do with champagne. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that felt like judgment. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying James' words until they carved grooves in her mind. Remind me how terrible I am. She flinched, pressing the heel of her hand to her forehead. How had she missed this? How had she been so blind? She'd spent years convincing herself she was doing everything right, providing a good home, working hard, keeping the lights on. But somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing him. Not the boy he was, but the man he was becoming. Carley swung her legs out of bed, her resolve hardening like steel. She wasn't going to lose him, not without a fight. By noon, she had a plan, or at least the rough outline of one, scribbled on a sticky note stuck to the fridge. 1. Cook his favorite meal. 2. Ask about school. 3. Listen. Really listen. 4. No lectures. No jokes about men. Ever. It looked simple enough, but Carley knew better. This wasn't a recipe. It was a minefield. One wrong word and the fragile thread between them could snap for good. She started with step 1. James loved spaghetti. Real spaghetti, not the Jared stuff. So she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The kitchen filled with the scent of simmering tomatoes and garlic, rich and comforting, like an apology in edible form. Carley tasted the sauce, added a pinch of basil, and tried to ignore the knot in her stomach. When the pasta was done, she plated it carefully, sprinkling Parmesan like fairy dust. She even poured him a glass of iced tea the way he liked it, extra lemon, no sugar. For a moment, she felt almost hopeful. Then came the hard part. Carley knocked on his door, balancing the tray like a peace offering. James? Hey, I made lunch. Pause. Then his voice, flat and distant. I'm not hungry. Carley swallowed her disappointment. You need to eat. I ate earlier. She hesitated, her grip tightening on the tray. Can I come in? Another pause, longer this time. Then, if you want. She pushed the door open, her heart thudding. His room was neat, almost sterile. Bed made, desk organized, posters aligned like soldiers. James sat at his desk, hunched over a notebook, his pen moving in slow, deliberate strokes. He didn't look up. Carley set the tray on the edge of his desk, forcing a smile. Spaghetti. Your favorite. Thanks. His tone was polite, but his eyes stayed on the page. Carley perched on the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. So, how's school? Fine. Any big projects coming up? Not really. She bit her lip, searching for something. Anything. That wouldn't sound like an interrogation. You know, I was thinking, maybe we could do something together this weekend. Just the two of us. James finally looked up, his gaze cool and unreadable. Why? The question hit harder than she expected. Carley forced a laugh, brittle and thin. Because I miss hanging out with you. He studied her for a long moment, then returned to his notebook. I'm busy. Carley's smile faltered. She wanted to push, to demand he make time. But her father's words echoed in her head. Start by listening. So she sat in silence, watching him write, the sound of his pen scratching like a metronome for her guilt. After a minute, James spoke without looking up. You don't have to do this. Carley blinked. Do what? Pretend. His voice was calm, almost gentle, and that scared her more than anger. You don't have to cook for me or ask about school. I know you're trying, but it feels fake. Carley's throat tightened. It's not fake. I want to fix things. James set his pen down, turning to face her fully for the first time. His eyes were steady, dark pools of hurt and something harder. Something like resignation. You can't fix years in a day. The words sliced clean through her defenses. Carley nodded slowly, her chest aching. You're right. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then James picked up his pen again, his attention sliding back to the page like a door closing. Carley rose, her legs heavy, and moved toward the door. If you change your mind about lunch, it's here. He didn't answer. Back in the kitchen, Carley stared at the untouched plate of spaghetti, her appetite gone. She felt like she'd run a marathon only to collapse at the starting line. Her plan had been simple, but reality was messy, tangled in years of silence and bitterness. She sank into a chair, pressing her forehead to the cool wood of the table. She couldn't give up. She wouldn't. But how did you rebuild trust when the foundation was cracked beyond recognition? Her phone buzzed, startling her. A text from Lila. How's it going? Carley typed back. Disaster. He barely looked at me. Lila replied almost instantly. Give it time. He's a teenager. They're allergic to parents. Carley stared at the screen, her fingers hovering. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. This was deeper, darker. A wound she'd helped carve. And time alone wouldn't heal it. She needed more than spaghetti and small talk. She needed a way to show him she was changing. Not just for him, but for herself. That night, Carley sat on the couch with her laptop, scrolling through articles on repairing parent-teen relationships. Most of them sounded like fortune cookie wisdom. Communicate openly. Validate feelings. Be patient. She wanted a manual, a step-by-step guide, something that would guarantee success. But life didn't work that way. She closed the laptop with a sigh, rubbing her temples. Maybe she should start smaller. Less talking, more doing. Something that showed she respected him. Not as a child, but as a person. Her gaze drifted to the hallway, where his door stood closed like a fortress. She thought of the way he'd looked at her. Calm, distant, almost grown. And a pang of fear shot through her. He was changing, faster than she could keep up. If she didn't find a way in soon, she might lose him for good. Carley grabbed a notebook and pen, flipping to a blank page. At the top, she wrote in bold letters, new plan. Underneath, she listed, stop the Saturday rants. A show interest without hovering. Find something he cares about and care about it too. Apologize. For real. No excuses. She stared at the last point, her stomach twisting. Apologies were easy when they were about spilled milk or missed calls. This wasn't easy. This was years of bitterness, years of words she couldn't take back. But if she wanted to earn his trust, she had to start with the truth, even if it hurt. Carley closed the notebook, her resolve settling like stone. Tomorrow she would try again. And the day after that. And every day until James believed her. Because losing him wasn't an option. Down the hall, James lay awake, the glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. His notebook lay open, filled with sketches, shapes and lines that made sense only to him. He wasn't writing about school or resolutions. He was drawing walls thick and high with gates locked tight. He heard his mother moving around, the faint creak of floorboards, the soft clink of dishes. Part of him wanted to believe she meant what she said, that she wanted to fix things. But another part, the part that had been listening for years, whispered that people didn't change. Not really. James closed the notebook, turning off the lamp. Darkness settled over the room, heavy and familiar. He pulled the blanket up to his chin, his jaw tight. If she wanted to prove him wrong, she'd have to do more than cook spaghetti. Chapter 4. Enter the neighbor. Carley's Saturday started with good intentions and ended with a trash bag breaking open on her driveway. She stood there in her slippers and faded yoga pants, staring at the mess like it had personally betrayed her. Coffee grounds, eggshells, and what looked suspiciously like last night's spaghetti sauce oozed across the pavement in a slow, mocking crawl. Perfect, she muttered, crouching to scoop the disaster back into the torn bag. The January wind nipped at her cheeks, and she silently cursed herself for not buying the heavy-duty bags like her dad always told her to. She was halfway through salvaging the mess when a voice called out behind her. Warm, amused, and entirely unfamiliar. Need a hand? Carley froze, a wad of damp paper towels clutched in her fist. She turned slowly, and there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy hoodie and jeans that looked like they'd been made for him. His hair was dark blonde, tousled in a way that suggested either a strong breeze or a complete disregard for combs. He held a black trash bag in one hand and a smile in the other. Carley blinked. No, Yes. I mean, she gestured helplessly at the carnage. It's fine. I've got it. The stranger crouched beside her anyway, his movements easy, confident. Looks like a two-person job. Carley opened her mouth to protest, then shut it again when he scooped up a handful of coffee grounds without flinching. You don't have to. I know, he said, grinning. But I'm a sucker for damsels in distress. Carley snorted, more out of reflex than amusement. Damsel? I'm wearing slippers and a hoodie that's older than my kid. Still counts, he said, tying the new bag with a neat twist. I'm Ethan, by the way. Just moved in next door. Carley blinked again, her brain scrambling to catch up. Next door? The Johnson house. Yep, they downsized. I upsized. He flashed a smile that could power a small city. And you are? Carley. She wiped her hands on her sweatshirt, wincing at the streaks of spaghetti sauce. Carley Meadows. Nice to meet you, Carley Meadows. Ethan stood, offering his hand like they were at a cocktail party instead of a garbage graveyard. Carley hesitated, then shook it, her fingers tingling against his warm, calloused grip. Thanks for the assist, she said, trying to sound casual. I usually handle my own disasters. Happy to help, Ethan said, hefting the bag like it weighed nothing. Where's the bin? Carley pointed, and he strode over, muscles flexing under the hoodie in a way that made her brain short-circuit. She stared for a beat too long, then snapped her gaze back to the pavement, cheeks burning. Get a grip, Carley. He's a neighbor, not a rom-com audition. By the time Ethan returned, Carley had mostly regained her composure. Mostly. So, he said, brushing his hands on his jeans. Do you always start your weekends with a trash wrestling match? Or was this a special occasion? Carley laughed, the sound rusty but real. Only on days ending in Y. Ethan grinned, and for a moment, the cold January air felt a little warmer. Then a voice cut through the quiet, sharp and unexpected. Mom! Carley turned to see James standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He wore his usual uniform. Dark hoodie, jeans, sneakers. But something in his posture made Carley's stomach twist. He looked wary, like he'd walked into a scene he didn't understand. Hey, bud, Carley said, forcing brightness into her tone. This is Ethan. He just moved in next door. Ethan offered a friendly wave. Hey, James. Nice to meet you. James nodded, his gaze flicking between them like a silent interrogation. Hi. Carley felt the tension coil tighter. She wanted to explain. It's just a neighbor, nothing weird. But the words stuck. James lingered for another beat, then muttered, I'm going to the park, and turned away. Wait, Carley started. But the door clicked shut before she could finish. She stood there, the weight of his silence pressing against her ribs. Ethan shifted, his smile dimming. Everything okay? Carley forced another laugh, brittle this time. Teenagers. They're complicated. Ethan nodded, his eyes kind. I've got one of those too. 12 going on 25. Carley blinked. You have a kid? Yep. Emma. His smile returned, softer now. She's the boss of the house. Carley felt something loosen in her chest. A thread of common ground, fragile but real. Sounds familiar. Ethan chuckled, glancing toward his driveway. Well, I should let you get back to whatever you were doing before the trash apocalypse. Carley smiled, genuine this time. Thanks again for the help. Any time, he said, and for a moment, his gaze held hers, steady, warm, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Carley standing in the cold with her heart doing somersaults. Inside, the house felt heavier than before. Carley dumped her slippers by the door and sank onto the couch, her mind spinning. Ethan was, well, Ethan. Charming, helpful, easy on the eyes. The kind of man she'd sworn off years ago. And yet, something about him tugged at her. Something she didn't want to name. She thought of James, his guarded expression. The way he'd looked at her like she was a stranger. Guilt gnawed at her ribs. She couldn't afford distractions. Not now. Not when her relationship with her son was hanging by a thread. Carley grabbed her notebook from the coffee table, flipping to the page labeled New Plan. She added a fifth bullet point in bold letters. Do not flirt with neighbor. She stared at it for a long moment, then underlined it twice. James walked to the park with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, the winter air biting at his cheeks. He wasn't angry. Not exactly. Just tired. Tired of feeling like a guest in his own house. Tired of wondering if his mom saw him or just the space he occupied. And now there was a new guy. A neighbor with a smile that looked like trouble. James didn't know what bothered him more. The fact that his mom had laughed with him, or the fact that she'd looked happy. He kicked at a patch of ice, watching it shatter into shards. Happiness was fine. He wanted her to be happy. But not like this. Not with someone who'd prove her right about everything she'd ever said about men. James clenched his jaw, the old anger simmering beneath the surface. He didn't trust men. He didn't trust his father, and he sure as hell didn't trust some stranger with perfect teeth and a hoodie that probably cost more than James' sneakers. He sat on the swings, the chains cold against his fingers, and stared at the empty basketball court. If his mom wanted to change, fine. But he wasn't going to make it easy. Not after years of feeling like collateral damage. Back home, Carley stared out the window, watching the sky fade to gray. She thought of Ethan's smile, James' silence, and the widening gap between them. She wanted to fix things. She wanted to believe she could. But right now, all she had was a notebook full of bullet points and a heart that didn't know which way to turn. She closed her eyes, whispering a promise to herself. James comes first. Always. But in the quiet corners of her mind, another thought lingered. Soft, dangerous, impossible to ignore. What if Ethan isn't like the others? Chapter 5. James notices. Sunday morning arrived with a pale winter sun and the smell of coffee drifting through the house. Carley stood at the kitchen counter, stirring sugar into her mug like it owed her money. She hadn't slept well. Her mind had been a carousel of Ethan's smile, James' silence, and the notebook of promises sitting on her nightstand. She was halfway through her second cup when the doorbell rang. Carley froze, her spoon clinking against the ceramic. Visitors were rare on Sundays, and her friends had sworn they were spending the day in sweatpants and Netflix. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Ethan stood there, holding a cardboard box and wearing that same easy grin that made her pulse trip over itself. "Morning," he said, his voice warm enough to melt frost. "Sorry to bother you. I was unpacking and found these, Emma's old books. Thought James might like them." Carley blinked at the box. Titles peeked out in colorful spines. Fantasy novels, graphic novels, a couple of classics. "That's really thoughtful." Ethan shrugged, his smile crooked. "Figured they'd be better off with someone who'll read them instead of collecting dust in my garage." Carley opened her mouth to thank him, but a voice cut in from behind her. "What's going on?" James stood at the end of the hall, his hands shoved into his hoodie pocket, his expression guarded. Carley felt her stomach tighten. She stepped aside, gesturing toward Ethan. "James, this is Ethan, our new neighbor. He brought some books for you." James' gaze flicked to the box, then to Ethan, then back to the box. "Why?" Ethan chuckled softly, unbothered by the edge in James' tone. "Because I heard you're 14, and these were Emma's favorites when she was around your age. She's 12 now, but she's already moved on to heavier stuff. Thought you might enjoy them." James stared at him for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then, without a word, he walked over and peered into the box. His fingers brushed a spine. The Hobbit. Before retreating like the books might bite. "They're yours if you want them," Ethan said, his voice easy, no pressure. "If not, no hard feelings." James didn't answer. He just nodded once, curt and silent, and disappeared down the hall with the box in his arms. Carley exhaled slowly, her pulse still racing. "Sorry about that. He's not great with strangers." Ethan smiled, unfazed. "Teenagers. Comes with the territory." Carley laughed weakly. "You seem to handle it better than I do." "Practice," Ethan said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Emma's been giving me attitude since she learned how to spell it." Carley grinned despite herself, the tension in her chest loosening just a fraction. "Thanks for the books. Really. Any time," Ethan said, stepping back. "And hey, if you ever need a break from parenting, Emma and I are making chili later. You're welcome to join." Carley hesitated, her heart doing that stupid somersault again. "That's nice of you. I'll think about it." Ethan nodded, his smile lingering like sunlight before he turned and headed down the driveway. Carley closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, her breath shaky. "Do not flirt with neighbor," she reminded herself, picturing the underlined bullet point in her notebook. But her pulse didn't seem to care about bullet points. James sat on his bed, the box of books beside him like an unwanted guest. He stared at the spines, his fingers tracing the embossed letters of The Hobbit. He'd read it once, years ago, before everything fell apart. Before his dad left. Before his mom started talking about men like they were a plague. He hated that the gesture meant something. Hated that Ethan hadn't tried too hard, hadn't forced conversation, hadn't looked at him like a problem to solve. It was different, and James didn't know what to do with different. He picked up a graphic novel, flipping through the pages without really seeing them. Part of him wanted to march back to the kitchen and tell his mom exactly what he thought of her new neighbor. But another part, the part that remembered what it felt like to have someone notice him, stayed quiet. Later that afternoon, Carley found James in the living room, sprawled on the couch with one of the graphic novels open on his lap. Her heart did a little flip, hope sparking like a match. "Good book?" she asked, keeping her tone light. James shrugged. "It's okay." Carley smiled, sinking into the armchair across from him. "I used to love those when I was your age." James glanced up, his brow furrowing. "You read comics?" "Graphic novels," Carley corrected with a grin. "And yes, don't look so shocked." James smirked, barely, but it was there, and Carley felt the tiniest crack in the wall between them. She wanted to push, to keep the conversation going, but she remembered her father's advice, start by listening. So she stayed quiet, letting the moment breathe. After a minute, James closed the book and stood. "I'm going to my room." Carley nodded, hiding her disappointment. "Okay." But as he walked away, she noticed something. A subtle shift in his posture. A looseness that hadn't been there yesterday. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. That evening, Carley sat at the kitchen table with her notebook, adding a new bullet point. Small wins count. Don't rush. She stared at the words, her chest tight with a mix of hope and fear. She was making progress, tiny, fragile progress, but the road ahead still felt endless. And now there was Ethan, complicating everything with his easy smile and his box of books. Carley closed the notebook, her resolve firm. James came first. Always. But as she rinsed her coffee mug and stared out the window at the glow of Ethan's porch light, she couldn't help wondering if maybe, just maybe, life was trying to hand her more than one second chance. Down the hall, James lay on his bed, the graphic novel open again. He wasn't reading. He was thinking. About Ethan, about his mom, about the way her laugh had sounded this morning. Softer, lighter, like she'd remembered something she'd forgotten years ago. James hated how much that bothered him. He didn't want her miserable. He just didn't want her happy because of some guy. Not after everything she'd said. Not after everything his dad had done. He turned the page, his jaw tight. If Ethan was sticking around, James needed to figure out where he stood. And right now, the only thing he knew for sure was this: he didn't trust him. Chapter 6. Girls' Night Disaster. Saturday afternoon arrived like clockwork, and with it came the ritual Carley had been dreading all week. Girls' night. Normally, these gatherings were her sanctuary. A safe space to vent about bad dates and swap horror stories over wine. But today, the thought of her friends dissecting men like frogs in biology class made her stomach twist. She tried to cancel. Really, she had. But Lila had texted back with a gif of a crying puppy and the words, "Don't you dare bail on me, woman." Jenna followed up with, "We need details about your hot neighbor." And Marcy sealed the deal with, "I'm bringing cheesecake." Resistance is futile. So here Carley was, fluffing throw pillows like they were shields against incoming fire, praying James would stay in his room and the conversation wouldn't veer into dangerous territory. Spoiler, it did. By the time the wine was poured and the cheesecake was sliced, Lila was leaning forward like a detective interrogating a suspect. "So," she said, her eyes gleaming, "tell us about Mr. Tall, Dark, and Helpful." Carley groaned, sinking deeper into the couch. "He's just a neighbor." "Just a neighbor?" Jenna snorted, swirling her glass. "Honey, neighbors don't show up with boxes of books unless they're auditioning for the role of perfect man." Marcy grinned, fork poised midair. "Does he have a dog? Please tell me he has a dog. That's like the ultimate rom-com accessory." Carley laughed despite herself. "No dog, just a daughter, Emma. She's 12. Lila's eyebrows shot up. "Single dad? Oh, this is gold." "Stop," Carley said, her cheeks heating. "It's not like that." "Not yet," Jenna teased, wagging her finger. "But give it time. You've been single for, what, a decade? You deserve a little fun." Carley opened her mouth to protest, but the words tangled in her throat. Fun sounded nice. Too nice. And that was the problem. She couldn't afford distractions. Not when her relationship with James was hanging by a thread. "I'm focused on James," she said firmly, setting her glass down. "That's all that matters." "Of course," Marcy said, her tone soothing but her grin wicked. "But focusing on James doesn't mean you can't multitask." Carley rolled her eyes, but laughter bubbled up anyway. Rusty, reluctant, but real. For a moment it felt like old times. Safe, easy, until a voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "Wow." The word was soft, almost casual, but it froze Carley's blood. She turned slowly, her heart thudding. James stood in the doorway, his expression carved from stone. His gaze swept over the room. The wine glasses, the cheesecake, the three women grinning like conspirators, and landed on Carley. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but the tension in his jaw spoke volumes. "James," Carley said, her voice too bright, too brittle. "Hey, we were just talking about your hot neighbor." His tone was flat, but the edge beneath it was sharp enough to cut. Lila shifted uncomfortably. Jenna stared at her wine like it held the secrets of the universe. Marcy cleared her throat, suddenly fascinated by the cheesecake. Carley's cheeks burned. "We were joking." James snorted, a sound that made Carley flinch. "Funny." He turned, heading for the hallway with long, deliberate strides. Panic flared in Carley's chest. She shot to her feet, nearly knocking over her glass. "James, wait." He didn't. The door to his room clicked shut with a finality that made Carley's stomach drop. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lila set her glass down gently, like she was afraid to break something. "Carley." Carley pressed a hand to her forehead, her pulse pounding. "I told you, I can't do this right now." Jenna winced. "We didn't mean—" "I know," Carley said, her voice tight, "but he heard. And now he thinks." She couldn't finish. Couldn't put words to the look in James' eyes, the hollow ache, the simmering anger. It was the same look he'd worn on New Year's Day, and it terrified her. Marcy reached out, squeezing Carley's hand. "Go talk to him." Carley nodded, her throat thick. "Yeah." She left the living room, her friends' worried faces blurring behind her. and walked down the hall on legs that felt like lead. She paused outside James' door, her heart hammering, and knocked softly. "James? Can we talk?" Silence. Carley swallowed hard. "Please." Still nothing. She rested her forehead against the door, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I wasn't thinking." The words hung in the air, unanswered. Carley waited another minute, then turned away, her chest aching. Back in the living room, her friends were gathering their things, their laughter gone, replaced by quiet guilt. Lila hugged her tightly. "You'll fix this." Carley nodded, though the knot in her stomach said otherwise. "I have to." When the door closed behind them, Carley sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. She stared at the hallway, at the closed door that felt like a wall she couldn't climb, and whispered a promise to herself. "Tomorrow, I'll make him understand." Somehow. Inside his room, James sat on the edge of his bed, his fists clenched. He wasn't surprised. Not really. He'd known this was coming. The moment his mom stopped pretending and started chasing happiness somewhere else. Somewhere that didn't include him. He hated how much it hurt. Hated that a part of him still wanted her to knock again, to tell him he was wrong, that he mattered more than some guy with a box of books and a perfect smile. But she didn't, and that told him everything he needed to know. James lay back, staring at the ceiling, the anger simmering like coals. If she wanted to play house with the neighbor, fine. But he wasn't going to stick around and watch. Chapter 7. The blow-up. Sunday evening settled over the house like a heavy blanket, muffling every sound except the ticking of the kitchen clock. Carley sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold, staring at the steam that had long since vanished. The silence was oppressive, thick with everything unsaid. She'd spent the day trying to find the right words. Words that could bridge the chasm between her and James. But every sentence she rehearsed sounded hollow, like patching a sinking ship with duct tape. How do you explain years of bitterness? How do you undo the damage of casual cruelty disguised as jokes? The answer came in the form of a door opening down the hall. Carley's head snapped up, her pulse quickening. James emerged, his hoodie zipped to his chin, his expression carved from stone. He walked past her without a glance, heading for the fridge. Carley rose, her legs trembling. "James," she said softly, "can we talk?" He didn't answer. He opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and shut the door with a quiet click. Carley stepped closer, her voice pleading now. "Please, just 5 minutes." James turned then, slowly, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. It wasn't anger. Not the explosive kind she'd braced for. It was worse. It was calm, cold, like a glacier moving toward her, unstoppable and merciless. 5 minutes. His tone was flat, almost mocking. "Sure, let's talk." Carley swallowed hard. "I know you're upset." "Upset?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound that didn't belong to him. "You think I'm upset?" Carley's throat tightened. I'm not upset, Mom." He stepped closer, his voice low, steady, terrifying in its restraint. "I'm done." The word hit like a slap. Carley flinched. "Done with what?" James stared at her, his eyes dark and hollow. "Done pretending you care." Carley's breath hitched. "James, that's not true. Isn't it?" His voice rose, sharp now, slicing through the silence. "You've spent years sitting in that living room with your friends, laughing about how men are trash, how they cheat, how they ruin everything. And guess what? I'm a man, or I will be. So what does that make me?" Carley's heart cracked open, raw and bleeding. "No," she whispered. "No, James, I never meant." "You never meant?" He stepped closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "You never meant for me to hear? Because I did. Every word, every joke, every time you said men are worthless, I heard it. And I believed you." Carley shook her head, tears spilling now. "James, please. Do you know what that feels like?" His voice broke, jagged with pain. "To sit in your room and listen to your own mother tear down everything you're supposed to become? To wonder if she hates you already? Or if she's just waiting for you to screw up, so she can say, 'See? I was right.'" Carley pressed a hand to her mouth, a sob clawing its way up her throat. "I don't hate you. God, James, I love you more than anything. Then why didn't you act like it?" His words were a whip, cracking through the air. "You didn't see me. You didn't notice when I stopped talking, when I stopped trying. You didn't even notice when my grades tanked. You were too busy being bitter." Carley staggered back, her legs weak. I thought you were fine." James laughed again, harsh and hollow. "Fine? I was drowning, Mom. And you were sitting on the shore, complaining about the water." Carley's tears blurred her vision, her chest aching like a wound that wouldn't close. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." James stared at her, his jaw tight, his eyes burning. "Sorry doesn't fix it." Carley nodded, her voice shaking. "I know, but I'll do whatever it takes. I'll change. Why?" His tone was sharp, accusing. "Because you got caught? Because you don't want to look like the bad guy?" Carley flinched, the truth of his words slicing deep. "No," she said, her voice breaking. Because I love you. Because I was wrong. About everything. James stood there, silent, his chest rising and falling like waves in a storm. For a moment, Carley thought he might soften. But then he shook his head, slow and deliberate. I don't believe you. The words shattered her like glass. Carley reached for him, desperate, but he stepped back, his eyes cold. Don't, he said quietly. Just don't. And then he turned, walking down the hall with long, steady strides. The door closed behind him, soft and final, leaving Carley in the wreckage of her own mistakes. She sank to the floor, her sobs tearing through the silence. She'd known this would be hard. She'd known trust wasn't something you could glue back together overnight. But hearing him say he didn't believe her, that was a wound she didn't know how to heal. Carley pressed her forehead to her knees, her tears soaking the fabric of her jeans. She thought of the years she'd wasted, the words she'd thrown like daggers without realizing who they were hitting. She thought of James, alone in his room, building walls she might never break through. And for the first time in her life, Carley Meadows was truly afraid. Not of being alone, but of losing the one person who mattered most. Down the hall, James sat on his bed, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. He hated the way his voice had cracked, hated the tears burning behind his eyes. But he couldn't stop the storm raging inside him. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But trust wasn't a switch you could flip. It was a bridge, and theirs had burned to ash years ago. James lay back, staring at the ceiling, his jaw tight. If his mom wanted to prove him wrong, she'd have to fight for it. And he wasn't going to make it easy. Not this time. Chapter 8. Ethan steps in. The park was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy rather than peaceful. Bare trees clawed at the gray sky, their branches etched like veins against the fading light. James sat on the swing, his sneakers scuffing the frozen dirt, the chains creaking softly with every shift of his weight. He wasn't swinging, just sitting, staring at the basketball court where a lone hoop stood like a relic of better days. He'd stormed out after the blow-up, his chest tight, his head pounding with words he couldn't take back. I don't believe you. The look on his mom's face haunted him, raw and broken, but he couldn't let himself care. Not now. Not when caring hurt this much. He was so lost in thought he didn't notice the footsteps until a voice broke the silence. Mind if I sit? James looked up, startled. Ethan stood there, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his breath puffing in the cold air. He wore that same easy smile, the one James didn't trust, but his eyes were calm, steady, like he wasn't here to push. James shrugged, his grip tightening on the chains. It's a free park. Ethan chuckled softly and lowered himself onto the swing beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant sound of traffic. James stared at the ground, waiting for the inevitable small talk. It didn't come. Instead, Ethan sat in silence, his swing barely moving, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It was weird. Most adults filled silence like it was a hole they couldn't stand to see. But Ethan let it breathe, and that unsettled James more than words would have. Finally, Ethan spoke, his tone casual. Emma and I come here a lot. She likes the swings too. James didn't answer. He didn't care about Emma or swings or whatever neighborly story Ethan was about to tell. But Ethan didn't seem bothered by his silence. She's 12, Ethan continued, his voice easy. Thinks she's 25. Gives me attitude like it's her job. James smirked before he could stop himself. Sounds familiar. Ethan glanced at him, his smile crooked. Yeah, I figured. Another pause. Then Ethan leaned back slightly, his hands gripping the chains. You know, when her mom left, Emma didn't talk to me for weeks. Not really. Just one-word answers. Shrugs, like she was building a wall and daring me to climb it. James stiffened, his jaw tightening. Why are you telling me this? Because I get it, Ethan said simply. That feeling like someone broke something you thought would last forever. Like you can't trust anyone anymore. James stared at him, his chest tight. You don't know me. No, Ethan agreed. But I know what it's like to be angry, to feel like the people who should protect you didn't. James swallowed hard, his throat burning. He wanted to tell Ethan to shut up, to stop poking at wounds that hadn't healed. But the words stuck, tangled in the knot of emotions choking him. Ethan didn't push. He just sat there, his voice calm, steady. Emma thought I'd leave too, that I'd decide it was too hard and walk away. And honestly, some days I wanted to. Not because of her, never because of her, but because I felt like I was failing. James blinked, caught off guard. Failing? Yeah. Ethan's smile was sad now, tinged with something heavier. You look at your kid and think, she deserves better than this mess. And you wonder if you're enough. James stared at the ground, his chest aching. He thought of his mom, her tear-streaked face, the way her voice had cracked when she said she loved him. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But the anger was still there, coiled like a snake. Ethan's voice softened. Your mom. She's trying. James snorted, bitter. She's trying now. Yeah, Ethan said, unflinching, because she realized she messed up. And that's hard, James. Admitting you were wrong? Changing? That takes guts. James shook his head, his fingers digging into the chains. She spent years trashing men. Like we're all the same. Like I'm gonna turn into my dad. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Then he said, "You're not your dad." James looked up sharply, his eyes burning. "How do you know?" "Because you care," Ethan said simply. "If you didn't, you wouldn't be sitting here angry and hurt. You'd be indifferent. That's what guys like your dad do. They stop caring. You haven't." James stared at him, the words sinking deep, unsettling something he'd buried. He wanted to argue, to throw up walls, but the fight drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. Ethan stood then, his hands sliding back into his pockets. "Look, I'm not here to tell you how to feel. You've got every right to be pissed. But don't let that anger convince you you're alone. You're not." James swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Why do you care?" Ethan smiled, soft and genuine. "Because I know what it's like to need someone to care." He turned, walking toward the path that led out of the park. "See you around, James." James watched him go, his chest a storm of emotions he couldn't name. He hated that Ethan's words made sense. Hated that they cracked something open inside him. A tiny fissure in the wall he'd built so high. He sat there long after Ethan left, the wind biting at his cheeks, the chains creaking softly. For the first time in weeks, the anger didn't feel quite so heavy. It was still there, simmering, but beneath it was something else. Something like hope. Back home, Carley paced the kitchen, her nerves frayed. James had been gone for hours, and every tick of the clock felt like a countdown to disaster. She texted him twice. "Are you okay? And please come home." But both messages sat unanswered, mocking her. When the door finally opened, Carley spun around, her breath catching. James stepped inside, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his expression unreadable. Carley's heart pounded. "James," she whispered. "Where have you?" "I went to the park," he said, his tone flat but not sharp. "I needed space." Carley nodded, her throat thick. "Okay." He started down the hall, then paused, his hand on the doorframe. "Mom." Carley froze. "Yeah." James didn't look at her. "I'm still mad." Carley swallowed hard. "I know. But," he hesitated, his voice softer now. "I'm not done talking." Carley's breath hitched, hope flaring like a match in the dark. "Whenever you're ready," she said gently. James nodded once, then disappeared into his room, the door closing with a quiet click. Carley stood there, her chest aching, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't dare let fall. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. And for Carley Meadows, something was enough to keep fighting. Chapter 9. Carley's Epiphany. Carley woke Monday morning with a sense of resolve, and a headache that felt like penance for yesterday's emotional roller coaster. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying James' words like a broken record. "I'm still mad, but I'm not done talking." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a crack in the wall, and Carley intended to wedge herself into that crack and widen it until the light poured through. She swung her legs out of bed, grabbed her notebook from the nightstand, and flipped to the page labeled New Plan. The bullet points stared back at her like silent judges. Stop the Saturday rants. Show interest without hovering. Find something he cares about, and care about it too. Apologize. For real. No excuses. Do not flirt with neighbor. Carley sighed, tapping her pen against the margin. She'd done okay with the first two. Sort of. The apology? That was a work in progress. And the last one? Well, Ethan's smile had been haunting her like a catchy song she couldn't shake. She closed the notebook and padded to the kitchen, brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead. As the machine gurgled, Carley stared out the window at the frost-tipped lawn, her thoughts spiraling. She'd spent years building a fortress of bitterness, brick by sarcastic brick, convinced it was the only way to protect herself from heartbreak. But all it had done was poison the air inside, and James had been breathing it every day. Her father's words echoed in her head. "Stop tearing down what you want him to build." Carley pressed her palms to the counter, guilt clawing at her ribs. She wanted James to grow up strong, kind, confident. But what had she shown him? That men were cheaters, that love was a lie, that trust was a fool's game. No wonder he didn't believe her. Carley poured her coffee and sank into a chair, staring at the steam curling upward like smoke from a fire she'd started. She needed to change. Not just for James, but for herself. She couldn't keep living in the ruins of her own cynicism. And maybe, just maybe, that meant opening the door to something new. The thought hit like a jolt, equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Carley grabbed her laptop, flipping it open with a determination that felt reckless. If she was serious about changing, she had to start somewhere. And what better way to prove she wasn't a bitter hermit than online dating? The idea sounded brilliant for exactly 3 seconds, until reality crashed in with a laugh track. Carley clicked on a popular dating site, wincing at the cheerful tagline, "Find your forever." She muttered under her breath. Forever lasted 6 years last time, but kept going. She created a profile, typing with the enthusiasm of someone filling out tax forms. Name Carley Meadows. Age, 36. Occupation, project manager. Interests, coffee, sarcasm, and not dying alone. She stared at the last line, groaned, and deleted it. After 20 minutes of agonizing edits, her profile read like a hostage note. Fun-loving professional seeks honest connection. Enjoys books, hiking, and laughter. Carley snorted. She hadn't hiked since college, and the last time she laughed without wine was, well, she couldn't remember. She uploaded a photo, cropped carefully to hide the laundry pile in the background, and hit save. The site immediately bombarded her with matches, each accompanied by a tagline that sounded like bad fortune cookies. Mike, 42, looking for my queen. Brad, 39, love is a battlefield. Derek, 44, just a simple guy who loves his mom. Carley groaned, scrolling through profiles like she was shopping for disappointment. One guy posed shirtless in a bathroom mirror, flexing like he was auditioning for a protein powder commercial. Another listed his hobbies as crypto and conspiracy theories. Carley slammed the laptop shut, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. Okay, she muttered, wiping tears from her eyes. Maybe not that door. The laughter faded, leaving a quiet ache in its wake. Carley leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The truth was, she didn't want a stranger from the internet. She didn't want forced small talk or awkward first dates. What she wanted, what she'd been afraid to admit, was something real, something steady, something like Ethan. The thought slipped in like a thief, and Carley tried to shove it out, but it lingered, stubborn and warm. Ethan wasn't just charming, he was kind, thoughtful. The way he talked about Emma, the way he'd helped her without making her feel small. It was different, safe somehow. Carley pressed her palms to her face, groaning. Do not flirt with neighbor, she muttered, picturing the underlined bullet point. But her heart didn't care about bullet points. It cared about the way Ethan's smile had made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken beyond repair. She shook her head, forcing the thought away. James came first, always, and if she wanted to earn his trust, she had to prove it, not with words but with actions. That afternoon, Carley knocked on James' door, her stomach in knots. Hey, she said softly. I'm making dinner. Your favorite. Burgers. Want to help? Silence stretched, taut and fragile. Then the door opened a crack, and James' eyes appeared, wary but curious. Why? Carley swallowed hard. Because I miss hanging out with you, and because I want to listen. No lectures, no pressure, just you and me. James studied her for a long moment, his gaze sharp, searching. Then he opened the door wider, his voice quiet. Okay. Carley's heart soared, relief flooding her chest. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a miracle. But it was a start. They cooked in silence at first, the sizzle of burgers filling the kitchen like background music. Carley fought the urge to fill the quiet with chatter, focusing instead on small gestures. Passing him the spatula, asking if he wanted extra cheese. Slowly, the tension eased, replaced by something softer, tentative. When they sat down to eat, James spoke first. You don't have to do this every night. Carley smiled gently. I know, but I want to. James nodded, his eyes dropping to his plate. For a moment, Carley thought that was the end of it. Then he said, almost too softly to hear, thanks. Carley blinked, her throat tightening. You're welcome. It was a small word, a fragile word, but for Carley Meadows it felt like hope. Later, after James retreated to his room, Carley curled up on the couch with her notebook, adding a new bullet point. Progress isn't loud. Celebrate the whispers. She stared at the words, her chest warm, her heart steady. She wasn't fixed. James wasn't healed, but they were moving inch by inch, step by step, toward something better. And for the first time in years, Carley believed they might get there. Across the street, a porch light flicked on, casting a golden glow against the winter dusk. Carley's gaze drifted to the window, to the house next door, and her heart did that stupid somersault again. She closed her notebook, whispering to herself, one thing at a time. But deep down, she knew the truth. Some doors don't stay closed forever. Chapter 10. The olive branch, Tuesday evening draped the neighborhood in a soft winter hush, the kind that made every porch light glow like a beacon. Carley stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, her heart pounding like a drum. She'd spent the day rehearsing what she needed to say. Real words, not band-aid apologies. Words that admitted fault, that stripped away excuses, that told James the truth he deserved. She heard his door open down the hall, the sound sharp in the quiet house. Carley drew a breath, steadying herself, and stepped into the living room just as James appeared, hoodie zipped, phone in hand. Hey, she said softly. James glanced up, his expression guarded. Hey, Carley swallowed hard. Can we talk? Really talk? He hesitated, his jaw tight, then nodded once. Okay. Carley gestured to the couch, her pulse racing. They sat at opposite ends, the space between them feeling like miles. Carley clasped her hands, forcing herself to meet his eyes. I need to say something, she began, her voice trembling. And I need you to hear me. Not because I want to make this go away, but because you deserve the truth. James said nothing, his gaze steady, waiting. Carley drew a shaky breath. I've been bitter, angry. Ever since your dad left, I've carried that anger like armor. And I thought if I kept it sharp, it would protect me. But all it did was hurt you. Her throat tightened, tears burning behind her eyes. I said things, awful things, about men, about trust, about love. And I didn't think about how those words sounded to you, how they made you feel. I was so focused on surviving that I forgot you were listening. James shifted slightly, his fingers curling against his knee. Carley pressed on, her voice breaking. You're not your dad. You're not any of the men I complained about. You're you, kind, smart, strong. And I should have told you that every single day instead of letting my bitterness poison the air we breathe. She wiped at her cheeks, her tears falling freely now. I'm sorry, James. Not because you called me out. Not because I got caught. But because I was wrong. And I will spend every day proving that to you if you let me. Silence stretched, heavy and fragile. James stared at her, his eyes dark, unreadable. Carley's heart thudded like a drum in her ears. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but sharp. Words are easy. Carley nodded, her chest aching. I know. That's why I'm not asking you to believe me right now. I'm asking for a chance to show you. James looked away, his jaw tight. For a moment, Carley thought he'd shut down again. But then he said, almost reluctantly, how? Carley blinked, hope flaring like a match. By listening. By being here. By changing. Whatever it takes. James was silent for a long moment, then stood, his voice low. I'll think about it. Carley nodded, her throat thick. That's all I ask. He walked down the hall, his footsteps soft, his door closing with a quiet click. Carley sank back against the couch, her chest hollow but lighter somehow. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a miracle. But it was a crack in the wall, and Carley intended to widen it until the light poured through. She was still sitting there, staring at the darkened hallway, when the doorbell rang. Carley startled, wiping her cheeks, and opened the door to find Ethan standing on the porch, his breath puffing in the cold air. He wore a navy jacket and that same easy smile that made her pulse trip over itself. Hey, he said, his voice warm. Sorry to drop by unannounced. Carley managed to smile, though her heart was still raw. It's okay. What's up? Ethan shifted, his hands in his pockets. There's a community event tomorrow night, winter festival at the rec center. Food, games, music. Emma's dragging me there, and I thought, maybe you and James would want to come. Carley blinked, caught off guard. Oh, that's nice of you. Ethan shrugged, his smile crooked. Figured it might be good for both of you. Get out of the house, have some fun. No pressure. Carley hesitated, her mind spinning. James was still fragile, still simmering with anger. But maybe, just maybe, a night away from the tension could help. And Ethan, well, Ethan was offering a lifeline she hadn't expected. I'll ask him, she said softly. Thank you. Ethan nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Hope you can make it. He turned to leave, then paused, glancing back. Carley. She looked up, her breath catching. Yeah, you're doing okay, he said gently. Even when it feels like you're not. Carley's throat tightened, our chest aching in a way that felt almost good. Thanks, she whispered. Ethan smiled, warm and steady, then walked down the driveway, his figure fading into the winter dusk. Carley closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in weeks she felt something like hope. The next evening, the rec center buzzed with life. Strings of lights twinkling overhead, the scent of chili and cinnamon drifting through the air. Carley stood just inside the entrance, her coat buttoned tight, her nerves jangling like sleigh bells. James walked beside her, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, his expression neutral but not hostile. A small victory Carley clung to like a lifeline. Ethan spotted them from across the room, his smile lighting up the space like a sunrise. He waved, Emma bouncing at his side, her ponytail swinging like a metronome. Hey, Ethan called, weaving through the crowd. You made it. Carley smiled, her pulse skipping. We did. Ethan grinned at James, his tone easy. Glad you came, man. There's a basketball shootout starting in 10 minutes. You in? James blinked, caught off guard. Maybe. Emma tugged his sleeve, her eyes bright. Come on. I need a partner. Everyone else here is boring. James smirked. Barely, but it was there. And Carley felt her heart swell. Go, she said softly. Have fun. James nodded, following Emma toward the court, his shoulders loosening with every step. Carley watched him go, her chest warm, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't dare let fall. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. Looks like a good start. Carley turned to him, her smile trembling. Thank you for inviting us. Ethan shrugged, his gaze steady. Anytime. For a moment, they stood there, the hum of laughter and music swirling around them, the air charged with something Carley hadn't felt in years, something like possibility. And for the first time since her world shattered, Carley Meadows let herself believe in second chances. Chapter 11. Sparks fly. The The rec center pulsed with life, strings of white lights twinkling overhead, laughter spilling from every corner, and the scent of cinnamon and chili weaving through the air like a promise. Carley stood near the refreshment table, clutching a cup of hot cocoa, her nerves humming like a live wire. She'd spent years avoiding crowds, avoiding vulnerability, and now here she was, in a room full of strangers, watching her son shoot hoops with a girl who had more confidence in her ponytail than Carley had in her entire body. James was laughing. Carley blinked, stunned. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a forced smirk. It was real, bright, and unguarded. Emma darted across the court, her sneakers squeaking, and James followed, his movements quick and sure. For a moment, Carley saw the boy he used to be, the one who begged for 5 more minutes at the park, who grinned like the world was his playground. Her chest ached with relief and something softer, something like hope. You look like someone just handed you a winning lottery ticket. Carley turned, her pulse skipping. Ethan stood beside her, his jacket unzipped, his smile warm enough to melt the frost clinging to her nerves. He held 2 cups of cocoa, steam curling upward like smoke signals. Carley laughed, shaky but real. Feels like it. Ethan offered her one of the cups. Extra marshmallows, I guessed. Carley blinked, surprised. You guessed right. Lucky me, Ethan said, his grin crooked. Or maybe lucky you. Carley rolled her eyes, but her cheeks warmed. Smooth. Always, he said, his tone teasing but gentle. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching James sink a shot and pump his fist like he'd just won the NBA Finals. Carley's throat tightened. I haven't seen him smile like that in years. Ethan glanced at her, his expression soft. He's a good kid. Carley nodded, her chest aching. Better than I deserve. Ethan frowned, his voice firm. Don't say that. Carley looked at him, startled. It's true. No, Ethan said, his gaze steady. You're here. You're trying. That counts for more than you think. Carley swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. She wanted to argue, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she sipped her cocoa, letting the warmth seep into her bones. The basketball shootout ended with Emma crowing in victory and James grinning like he didn't mind losing. Carley watched them head toward the snack table, her heart swelling. She was so focused on James that she didn't notice Ethan moving until he extended a hand toward her. Dance with me. Carley blinked, her brain short-circuiting. What? Ethan nodded toward the corner where a local band was playing a soft, jazzy tune. Couples swayed under the glow of string lights, their laughter mingling with the music. Come on, it's a festival. You're supposed to have fun. Carley laughed, nervous. I haven't danced in years. Then you're overdue, Ethan said, his smile easy, his hand steady. One song. No pressure. Carley hesitated, her heart thudding like a drum. She thought of her notebook, of the bullet point she'd underlined twice. Do not flirt with neighbor. But then she thought of James, laughing across the room, and of herself, tired, lonely, craving something she hadn't let herself want in a decade. She placed her hand in Ethan's. The music wrapped around them like a warm blanket, soft and slow. Ethan's hand rested lightly at her waist, his other clasping hers, and Carley felt her breath hitch. She wasn't used to this, the closeness, the quiet intimacy of 2 bodies moving in sync. Her pulse skittered, her nerves buzzing, but beneath it all was something steady, something safe. You're good at this, she murmured, her voice shaky. Ethan grinned. Emma makes me practice. She says I dance like a malfunctioning robot. Carley laughed, the sound bubbling up like champagne. She's not wrong. Harsh? Ethan said, mock-offended, and Carley laughed harder, the tension melting from her shoulders. For a moment, she forgot the weight of the past, the cracks in her relationship with James, the walls she'd built so high. For a moment, she was just a woman dancing under string lights with a man who made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken beyond repair. The song ended too soon. Ethan released her hands slowly, his gaze lingering, warm and steady. Carley's cheeks flushed, her heart doing somersaults. But before she could speak, a voice cut through the music. Mom! Carley turned, her stomach dropping. James stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable, his eyes flicking from her to Ethan and back again. Carley's pulse spiked, guilt clawing at her ribs. Hey! She said, forcing brightness into her tone. Did you get snacks? James shrugged, his jaw tight. Yeah. Ethan smiled, easy and unbothered. You crushed it on the court, man. James didn't answer. He just looked at Carley, his gaze sharp, searching. Then he said, his voice low, Can we go? Carley nodded quickly. Of course. The drive home was silent, the kind of silence that hummed with tension. Carley gripped the steering wheel, her mind spinning, her heart pounding. She wanted to explain, to fill the quiet with words that would make everything okay. But she knew better. Words were easy. James had said so himself. When they pulled into the driveway, James unbuckled without a word and headed inside. Carley sat in the car for a long moment, her breath shaky, her chest aching. She'd felt sparks tonight, bright, warm, undeniable. But now all she felt was fear. Fear that those sparks had lit a fire she couldn't control. Inside, James sat on his bed, his fists clenched, his thoughts a storm. He'd seen his mom laugh tonight, really laugh. He'd seen her dance, her cheeks flushed, her eyes shining, and he hated how much it hurt. Not because he didn't want her happy. He did. But happiness with Ethan felt like betrayal, like proof that everything she'd said about men was a lie. James stared at the ceiling, anger simmering beneath his skin. He wasn't ready to forgive. He wasn't ready to trust. And now, he wasn't sure he was ready to share her either. Carley curled up on the couch, her notebook open on her lap, her pen hovering over the page. She wanted to write something, anything, that would make sense of the chaos in her chest. Instead, she scribbled 3 words in shaky letters. Don't lose him. She stared at the words, her throat tight, her eyes burning. She didn't know how to fix this. She didn't know how to balance the fragile hope blooming inside her with the fear of losing the boy who mattered most. But she knew one thing. Tomorrow she would try again. Chapter 12. The turning point. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that hummed with tension, like a storm crouched on the horizon. Carley sat on the couch, her notebook open on her lap, the words she'd written earlier staring back at her in shaky ink. Don't lose him. She traced the letters with her fingertip, her chest tight. Last night had been a mess, a beautiful, terrifying mess. She'd danced under string lights, laughed like she hadn't in years, felt sparks she couldn't deny. And then she'd seen James' face, sharp and shuddered, and the guilt had slammed into her like a freight train. Carley closed the notebook, pressing her palms to her eyes. She couldn't keep doing this, teetering between hope and fear, between wanting something for herself and needing to fix what mattered most. James came first, always, but how did she prove that when every step forward felt like 2 steps back? The sound of a door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. Carley looked up, her breath catching. James stood in the hallway, his hoodie unzipped, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the silence stretching taut. Then James spoke, his voice low. Can we talk? Carley's heart thudded. Of course. He walked to the couch, his movements slow, deliberate, and sank onto the far end. Carley turned to face him, her pulse racing, her throat dry. James stared at his hands, his fingers curling and uncurling like he was wrestling with words. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. I hate him. Carley blinked, startled. Ethan? James nodded, his jaw tight. I hate that he's here, that he makes you laugh, that he makes you look happy. Carley's chest ached, her breath shaky. James? I know it's stupid, James said quickly, his voice sharp with shame. I know you deserve to be happy, but every time I see you with him, all I can think is, what about me? What if you forget about me like Dad did? The words hit like a punch, raw and jagged. Carley's throat closed, tears burning behind her eyes. James, she whispered, her voice breaking. I could never forget you. Never. He shook his head, his fists clenched. You say that now, but Dad said it too. He said he loved me. He said he'd always be there. And then he left. And you've spent years talking about how men ruin everything. So what happens when Ethan ruins you? What happens when you're broken again? Do I just watch? Carley's tears spilled, hot and relentless. She reached for him, her hands trembling, and this time he didn't pull away. She gripped his shoulders, her voice fierce through the sobs. Listen to me. I'm not your dad. And Ethan isn't your dad. And you? Her voice cracked, raw and desperate. You are the center of my world, James. You always have been. I've been bitter. I've been blind. But I have never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. James stared at her, his eyes burning, his chest heaving. Then why didn't you see me? Carley's sob tore through the quiet. Because I was stupid. Because I thought surviving was enough. But I see you now. I see the man you're becoming. And I am so damn proud of you. James swallowed hard, his face crumpling. And then the dam broke. He folded into her arms, his body shaking, his sob muffled against her shoulder. Carley held him like she was holding the world together, her tears mingling with his, her heart breaking and healing all at once. I'm scared, James whispered, his voice shattered. I'm scared you'll leave, or he will, or everyone will. Carley kissed his hair, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I'm not going anywhere, ever. And if Ethan hurts me, if he hurts us, he's gone. You come first. Always. James clung to her, his grip fierce, and Carley felt something shift. A wall crumbling, a bridge rebuilding, fragile but real. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fixed. But it was a start. Later, after James retreated to his room with red eyes and a quiet thanks, Mom. Carley stepped onto the porch, the cold air biting her cheeks. She needed space to breathe, to process, to let the weight of the moment settle. She wasn't expecting Ethan. He stood at the edge of the driveway, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his breath puffing in the winter air. When he saw her, his smile flickered, soft, tentative, like he wasn't sure he belonged here. Hey, he said, his voice low. I was just walking. Thought I'd check in. Carley managed a shaky smile. Hi. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze searching her face. You okay? Carley laughed, brittle but real. Define okay. Ethan's smile softened. Fair point. For a moment, they stood in silence, the night humming around them, the glow of porch lights painting everything in gold. Carley wanted to tell him everything. The fight, the fear, the breakthrough. But the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she said the only thing that mattered. Thank you. Ethan frowned slightly. For what? For inviting us last night, Carley said, her voice steady now. For caring. For being patient. Ethan's eyes warmed, his smile slow and sure. Always. Carley's breath hitched, her heart pounding. She'd spent years building walls, years convincing herself she didn't need anyone. But tonight, standing under the winter sky with a man who felt like safety and sunlight, those walls didn't feel so strong. Ethan stepped closer, his voice soft. Carley? She looked up, her pulse skittering, and then his hand was at her cheek, warm against the cold, his touch gentle like he was asking permission. Carley's breath caught, her heart tumbling, and for the first time in a decade, she didn't pull away. The kiss was soft, tentative like a question. Carley answered with a whisper of her own, her fingers curling into his jacket, her tears mingling with the taste of hope. It wasn't fireworks, it wasn't a movie scene. It was real, warm and steady and terrifying in its simplicity. When they broke apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his breath shaky. I've wanted to do that since the trash bag incident. Carley laughed, the sound bubbling up like champagne, and for the first time in years it didn't feel forced. Felt like freedom. Inside, James lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his chest hollow but lighter somehow. He'd cried tonight, really cried, and it hadn't broken him. It had cracked something open, something he wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore. He thought of his mom's words, you come first, always, and for the first time in years he believed her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Chapter 13. New Year, New Rules. The first Saturday of the new year dawned bright and cold, sunlight spilling across Carley's living room like a promise she finally believed in. The scent of cinnamon rolls drifted through the air, mingling with laughter. The real kind, not the brittle sound she'd worn like armor for years. Carley stood at the kitchen island, frosting the rolls with a flourish that would have made her past self snort. Behind her, James lounged on the couch, his long legs sprawled, a graphic novel open on his lap. He wasn't hiding in his room. He wasn't silent. He was here in the same space, and that felt like a miracle. Mom, James said, his tone casual but warm. You missed a spot. Carley glanced at the tray, then at him, her brows lifting. Are you seriously critiquing my frosting skills? James smirked, the corner of his mouth twitching. Just saying. Presentation matters. Carley laughed, the sound bubbling up like champagne. Noted, Chef Meadows. Before James could fire back, the doorbell rang. Carley's pulse skipped, her cheeks warming, and James groaned like he already knew. Is that him? He asked, his tone flat but not hostile. A small victory Carley clung to like a lifeline. Carley wiped her hands, her heart doing somersaults. Probably. She opened the door to find Ethan standing there, his smile lighting up the winter morning like a sunrise. He held a paper bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. Emergency coffee delivery, he said, his voice warm. Because I know you. Carley laughed, her chest tightening in that way she was starting to love. You're a lifesaver. Always, Ethan said, stepping inside, his gaze flicking to James. Hey man. James nodded, his expression guarded but not icy. Hey. Ethan set the bag on the counter, pulling out 2 steaming cups and a box of donuts. Backup sugar supply, just in case. Carley grinned, shaking her head. You're spoiling us. Guilty? Ethan said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. For a moment, their gazes held, warm, steady, charged with something Carley didn't bother denying anymore. They ate together, the 3 of them, and for the first time in years, the house felt full, not just of sound, but of something deeper, something like peace. James spoke more than Carley expected, about school, about the basketball shootout, even about Emma's trash talk skills. Ethan listened, easy and unhurried, never pushing, never prying. Carley watched them, her chest aching with gratitude and something softer, something like joy. When the plates were cleared and the laughter faded into a comfortable hum, James stood, his hands shoved into his hoodie pocket. I'm gonna shoot hoops with Emma later, he said, his tone casual. Carley blinked. You are. James shrugged. She texted, said she needs a rematch. Carley smiled, her heart swelling. Sounds good. James hesitated, his gaze flicking to Ethan, then back to Carley. You can hang out, if you want. Carley froze, her breath catching. It wasn't permission, not exactly, but it was something. A crack in the wall, a thread of trust fragile but real. Thanks, bud, she said softly. James nodded, then disappeared down the hall, his footsteps light. Carley stood there, her chest warm, her eyes stinging, and when she turned to Ethan, her smile trembled. Did that just happen? she whispered. Ethan grinned, his voice low. Looks like it. Later, when the house was quiet again, Carley stepped onto the porch with Ethan, the winter air crisp against her cheeks. They stood side by side, their breath mingling in the cold, the silence easy now, like a shared secret. You're good with him, Carley said softly. Ethan shrugged, his smile gentle. He's a good kid. Just needed someone to remind him he matters. Carley swallowed hard, her throat thick. Thank you. For everything. Ethan turned to her, his gaze steady, warm enough to melt the frost clinging to her heart. You don't have to thank me. Carley laughed softly, her breath shaky. I think I do. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. Carley? She looked up, her pulse skittering, and then his hand was at her cheek, his touch gentle, his eyes asking permission she didn't hesitate to give. The kiss was soft, sweet, and steady, like sunlight breaking through clouds, like a promise whispered against winter air. When they broke apart, Carley rested her forehead against his, her laughter bubbling up like champagne. You know, she murmured, I had a rule about not flirting with the neighbor. Ethan grinned, his voice warm. Guess we broke that one. Carley laughed harder, the sound bright and unguarded, and for the first time in years it didn't feel like a risk, felt like freedom. Inside, James peeked through the window, his chest tight but not with anger this time. He watched his mom laugh, her eyes shining, and something shifted, a weight lifting, a knot loosening. He wasn't ready to call it perfect. He wasn't ready to say he trusted Ethan. But he was ready to believe his mom meant what she said. And for James Meadows, that was enough. That night, Carley curled up on the couch with her notebook, flipping to the last page. She wrote in bold letters, New year, new rules. Love without fear. Listen without judgment. Laugh without guilt. Family first. Always. She stared at the words, her chest warm, her heart steady. Outside, the porch light glowed against the winter dark, and Carley Meadows smiled. A real smile, bright and unguarded. Because for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise.